Chapter 22. The Family Secret. It was a small cell. The door of the cell was so close that if Reyes had had a free hand, he would have been able to reach out and touch it without having to stretch. The cell looked old. Everything about it looked tired and smelled of decay. The mantels and the bars were well rusted with age, and the walls were now a breeding ground for moss, and more than likely all manner of tiny insects. Just on the other side of the cell door, and clearly visible through the bars, was a small rectangular window. The window had no bars, but then it was far too small for anything larger than a cat to be able to climb through. It was on the left-hand side of the wall, and angled in such a way that Reyes could see nothing of what lay beyond it from his current vantage point. There was enough light coming in through that window to see by, but only just. Reyes still couldn't believe what had happened to him. He had to turn his head and look at his hand to remind himself of why he had been brought here. That was definitely the hand of a harpy. Those things on his back were wings, harpy wings. But if he was truly a harpy, why couldn't he feel those wings? He couldn't feel his tail either. It was as if the muscles that were supposed to move his wings and his tail weren't properly connected. Ray shivered. He couldn't even talk properly. He had a new head, and with it, a new mouth. If he tried to look down, he could see his snout sticking out in front of him. This new mouth of his, these new lips, were awkward to get used to, and seemed to be having trouble vocalizing certain sounds. He remembered that Agnart had had no trouble speaking flourish, but then she had been in captivity for years before he had met her. Perhaps he would manage in time. How he missed Agnart. She hadn't even stopped by his room to say goodbye. He had always had a greater affinity for her than she had had with anyone else in the castle, except maybe his sister. He was glad she had gotten her wings back, but he would have loved to have seen her just one more time. It suddenly occurred to Reyes that the harpy language had been created by harpies, and therefore geared towards the harpy's lips. When learning the harpy language, he had had a fair amount of trouble enunciating some of those words with his then human mouth. He remembered how cute Agnart's laugh had been when he mispronounced words like kettle, because he hadn't been able to get his lips around them properly. He had learnt to get it right in time, though. In the same way Agnart could speak flourish with those harpy lips of hers, Reyes had finally been able to speak harpy with human lips. Testing, Reyes said to himself, trying out the harpy language with his new lips. Actually, he felt a bit of a fool for talking to himself up here all alone. Nevertheless, his experiment had worked. He hadn't stumbled even slightly over the words, despite the fact he still wasn't used to the new face. Reyes began to wonder what had happened. How had he ended up in this cell? Philid cast some sort of spell on me, Reyes muttered to himself. Well, that much was obvious to him. Philid must have cursed him in some way, forced his body to take on the form of a harpy. Why a harpy? Did Philid know about Reyes' weird interest in the creatures? Reyes pulled gently on the chain holding his left wrist to the wall. He was at the wrong angle to employ all his strength, but the chain was weak with rust and threatened to snap almost immediately. These chains had originally been built to hold creatures that were much stronger than he was, but age had definitely taken its toll. A quick tug, then another, and the chain broke free. With his hand now free, he was able to use magic to open all the other locks, including the cell door. He ended with removing what was left of the broken manacle from his wrist by use of the same spell. Now what? Reyes knew he could escape from this tower easily, but then what was going to happen to his father? Reyes sat down on the hard, cold floor of the cell and continued to wait for his executioners. His position wasn't a lot better than it had been, but at least it was a lot more comfortable than he would be chained to the wall. He wished he could cry. He needed to cry. Harpies have no tear ducts, Agnart had told him. It wasn't the first time he had thought of her words. He had sometimes wished that his inability to cry might have meant that he really was a harpy. How he would have loved to have been a harpy, soaring high above the clouds. He sometimes wondered what it would have been like to truly be a harpy. Well, now he knew. Stuffed in a small cell at the top of a tower, awaiting the end of his life. Reyes glanced up at the window. That would be his only timepiece for the next 15 or 16 hours until they came to collect him. It seemed a very lonely way to die, sitting here alone, just watching the sunset, and then waiting for it to rise again. He was only 6.5 years old. He was too young to die, but it didn't seem as if he really had much of a choice. Out in the courtyard he could already hear the distinctive sound of sawing and hammering as carpenters busily prepared the stage for Reyes' farewell performance. In all the years he had lived here, he couldn't once remember his father putting anyone to death on the castle grounds. Reyes was going to be the first. He wondered if his father would be forced to do the deed himself. I see you, Reyes muttered in butchered flourish. The building of the gallows was loud. It blotted out every other sound in the courtyard, so it was quite a surprise when Reyes heard the distinctive sound of singing. Reyes recognised the tune. He had heard it a few times before. He had even sung it himself when he had been playing at marriages. Ode to Love was a traditional song that was usually sung at weddings, but it wasn't out of place at an engagement party. It was a song of congratulations to the bride and groom, and wished them a bountiful future. "Sounds like my sister's gotten engaged," Reyes commented to himself in the harpy tongue. Actually, he hadn't realised it before, but that upset him greatly. Here he was, a victim of some evil spell, and locked up in his own father's prison cell, and there she was, the one person in the whole world that Reyes thought he could rely on, continuing with her party as if nothing had happened. He regretted the harsh words he had spoken to her earlier, but he didn't expect she would take them to heart. Slowly, Reyes calmed himself down. It was likely she had no more choice in the matter than he did. If she cancelled the party, then the king wasn't likely to be all that amused. After all the dukes in the land had come to pay their respects. Besides, Reyes couldn't really find it in his heart to begrudge his sister her special day. It was just a shame that he wouldn't now be coming to her wedding. "It really doesn't make sense," he said to himself in harpy, his mind having wandered off on a tangent. Why would Philly do this to him? He had never met the man before today, let alone done anything to upset him. Some might consider the answer to be obvious, but Reyes hesitated to go there. All his life he had been dogged by some secret that no one would tell him. Even Agnart seemed to be aware as to what that secret was. If he was honest with himself, he would have to admit that he had always had a suspicion. But harpies were creatures of evil, and he wasn't evil. Harpies couldn't cast magic, and yet he could. No, there were too many inconsistencies. This had to be the doing of Philid. Out in the courtyard, he could hear men in armour mounting their horses over the sounds of the carpenters. Now that the prince and Jenny were officially engaged, it seemed that at least one of the dukes was already taking his leave of the party. It was good to know that not all the dukes were going to stay for the execution. Reyes wished he knew which one. Over the next hour, or what Reyes estimated to be an hour, he heard what sounded to him like 3 more dukes leaving the castle. Another estimated hour passed, and the sky was beginning to darken. Already it cast deep shadows into the tower. Reyes could no longer see where the floor stopped and the stairs started. He hated the idea of being stuck up here in the dark. It was going to be a long night. At least he wasn't still chained to the wall. Part of him even wished that they would just come and get him, and get it over with. He tried to say, and then breaking into the harpy language halfway through he declared, "I'll show them how the..." He thought to himself, stopping midstream. There was no harpy equivalent for the words son or duke. It took no more than maybe half an hour before darkness reigned completely in the cell. Reyes could see nothing. There was a very faint discolouring where the window was, but after a while even that was hard for him to make out. He even began to see the after-image of the window no matter which direction he happened to look. When he turned his head to look at his right hand, he couldn't even see his shoulder. Reyes wasn't totally blind though. He had a spell that would help him see in the dark. After his nighttime trip to the circus 2 years ago, he had insisted that Mangloss teach it to him. Since learning it, he hadn't found a single use for it, until now. It took him a couple of minutes to remember how the spell went, and then, suddenly, he could see again. The cell was much as it had been before it had gotten dark, and the spell didn't exactly make the place look as light as day, but he felt it was a lot better to be able to see his surroundings, rather than to be just sitting here in the dark until dawn. Reyes began to feel very lonely. He didn't want to die. He wished his sister would come. It would be nice if she would come and sit with him for a while, and chat about old times, and keep him company until the hour of his execution. He began to feel a great need for his mother. He wished he could cry. The hours marched by. He lay down on the stone floor and tried to sleep. He couldn't. He was far too uncomfortable. He would have to spend the whole night just listening to the sounds of the castle and waiting for the sun and the guards to come up. The sawing and hammering in the courtyard stopped. Then he heard someone talking. "Right, that's it. Yep, the king should be happy with that," commented a second. "It's late," said another. "I'm off to bed." The chatting continued, but they were now moving further away from Reyes' tower, and their words were lost in the other sounds of the castle. "Guess everything is ready for me," Reyes mumbled unhappily. The courtyard went quiet now. The only sound to be heard was that of a guard on the parapet wall just below the tower's window as he patrolled the ramparts. Then he heard Jenny's voice. She was laughing. She was actually laughing. Here he was counting down the last few hours of his life, and his sister was out in the courtyard, laughing. Reyes couldn't be sure, but he had a feeling she sounded a little drunk. The courtyard went quiet again. The sound of the guard just outside the window got louder and louder, and then softer again as his patrol took him back the other way. Then Reyes heard his sister's voice again. Her voice was soft and muffled, but Reyes was just about able to make out the words. "You two have been out here all night, when we should have all been having fun. Here, I brought you both something to drink." Her words seemed a little slurred. Reyes was certain she was drunk. "Thank you, my lady," one of the guards replied. "Would it be all right if I go up and see the prisoner?" she asked. Then she added playfully, "I want to taunt him." Reyes suddenly felt a lot of love for his sister. She had come to visit him after all. Whether or not the guards agreed to such a visit, Reyes didn't hear. The soldier outside the window returned, and the sound of his footsteps squashed that of the conversation. When the soldier left, heading back the way he had come, everything had gone silent again. Somehow he doubted they would let her come up. She was a member of the Demoth family, the family that Phaleed would no doubt have the king believing had been harbouring a harpy all these years. That had to be it, Reyes thought to himself. Sometime in the past, the Duke or one of his sons had done something to upset either Phaleed or the king, and rather than coming right out and destroying the family openly, they were conducting this little charade. What would be a better time than when all the dukes of the kingdom gathered together? Why hadn't Reyes seen it before? It was so obvious. Another noise suddenly interrupted the sounds of the night. There were footsteps, soft yet clear, coming up the tower. Reyes looked up hopefully. It was still the middle of the night. It was far too early for it to be the executioners come to get him. It had to be his sister. She must have convinced the guards to let her pass after all. She appeared at the top of the stairs like an angel, cloaked in a halo of torchlight. She looked at him, and he could see the sorrow in her eyes. "Hello, Reyes," she said. "How are you? I see you got yourself out of those manacles. That's good, they can't have been all that comfortable." There was no indication of any slurring in her words now. "Hello, sis," Reyes replied in the harpy tongue. He stayed sitting where he was. "I would get up, but I seem to be in a state of undress." "Horse and tiger, Reyes," Jenny exclaimed. There was a tear in her eye as she softened her tone and said, "Considering all that's happened tonight, I'm not going to be offended by a little bit of nudity." Then she switched languages. "So why are we speaking harpy?" "Because I aren't it's a sound, or if..." Reyes tried to explain. "I see," Jenny commented, switching back to flourish. "Side effect of the change, I'd guess. When you speak flourish, try to enunciate the words slowly. Speed will come, with practice." "I don't have that much time," Reyes replied. "I guess that Phaleed really had it in for me, cursing me like this." Jenny shook her head. "I guess it's time you knew the truth. Do you remember me once telling you that Agnart wasn't the first harpy father ever brought back to the castle?" "Vaguely," Reyes replied. He wasn't sure he liked where this was headed. "That harpy was you, Reyes. You were born as a harpy. We gave you a talisman that was enchanted so that you couldn't see it, but only you could remove it. That talisman was what was holding you in your human shape. All Philippe did was cast a spell to counter the enchantment on the talisman so that he could remove it. That's the big secret you would never tell me, Reyes asked. You didn't think I could handle it? We were scared to tell you, Jenny told him. We weren't certain how you'd react. Mangloss even suggested that after living among humans for so long, such a revelation might damage your sanity. I have to admit, though, the older you got, the harder it was to keep the truth from you. How did I end up with your family? Reyes asked, trying to switch to flourish. One day I'll have to tell you the whole story. For now, suffice to say, I rescued you. Your birth mother had dumped you out in the forest to die of exposure. Can you walk? I could crawl, Reyes replied slowly, but I'm not used to these feet. I'll carry you if I have to, Jenny declared. You're light enough. Reyes had already had enough of trying to speak flourish. I can't leave. They'll kill... Again there was no harpy word for father. He had to switch to flourish. Father. Then he jumped straight back to harpy. In my stead. Tell me about this rescue. Let me go to my death knowing the whole truth. They aren't going to kill father, Jenny replied. She pulled him to his feet, and Reyes immediately moved his hands to cover himself again. Prince Goti assures me that the king isn't about to execute father, now that the two of us are engaged. Can you be sure? Reyes asked. I can't be totally sure, of course, but I am sure that father has a better chance of surviving tomorrow than you do if you stay here, Jenny replied. I just hope the prince is right, Reyes declared uncertainly. Come on, I'll help you get to the bottom. How are your wings? Will you be able to fly? Jenny asked. Fly? Reyes asked tersely. I only just found out I'm a harpy. When would I have had the opportunity to learn to fly? Besides, I have absolutely no feeling in my wings whatsoever. Not my tail, come to think of it. Jenny put her torch on the floor for a moment and then placed her hands on either side of Reyes' shoulders. She then began to pour energy into him. You've been locked in a human body for so long, your own body has forgotten it even has wings. I'll see if I can do something about regenerating them. Thank you, sis, Reyes said after a few moments. I feel a lot better, almost rejuvenated. And your wings? Jenny asked, releasing her grip. Nothing, Reyes said. I know they are there, but it's as if my... He paused. He didn't know the word in the harpy language, so for one word he broke back into flourish. Brain has two new limbs that it doesn't know what to do with. It's like those people who can wiggle their ears while others can't. Well, I'm one of those who can't. I don't know what else to suggest, Jenny said. Maybe Mangloss will be able to help. I'm not sure it's a good idea to traipse around the castle grounds looking for people to talk to, Reyes replied. It's okay, Jenny assured him. We won't have far to look. Anyway, we can't spend the night sitting here and chatting. We have to get you out of the castle. Jenny collected her torch and led the way. Reyes followed at an uncertain pace. He didn't like his feet and made sure each was on the step properly before he was willing to risk lifting his other foot. It didn't help that the steps narrowed greatly towards the middle of the tower, forcing Reyes to follow the outermost wall. As it was, descending the stairwell, Reyes only felt safe if he used his hands to guide him. This made him feel exposed as he was no longer able to properly cover himself. He was glad that Jenny was leading the way and was therefore not looking at him. The two guards on duty at the bottom of the tower welcomed Jenny back. So, how is he? Has he resigned himself to what's going to happen to him tomorrow morning? Not exactly, Jenny replied. Poor guy, one of the guards said. It sounded as if he genuinely meant it. A harpy can expect no less, the other guard commented. Then Reyes reached the bottom of the stairs. Hey, said one of the guards, now alarmed. You weren't supposed to let him... I think you should sleep, Jenny told the guard. She waved her hand in front of the guard's face, and he fell to the floor unconscious. Hey, the second guard said. He reached for his sword. Sleep, Jenny repeated, also repeating the gesture, and the second guard also fell asleep. Now what? Reyes asked. Head on over to the winch house, Jenny told him. I'll be right behind you. First, I plan to remove the last half hour or so of their memories, so they'll have no recollection of me ever coming to see you. Reyes did as he was bid. It was dark in the courtyard, and the only light came from the torches that were ensconced against the walls of the castle. They lit up the soldiers on the battlements nicely, and Reyes had a nasty feeling that they lit him up too. He had done this before. 2 years or more ago he had snuck out of the castle in the dead of night. Back then, though, he had at least looked human. A guard, seeing him then, might not have noticed him. He made his way quickly over to the winch house, only too certain that there would be guards on duty there. There were indeed guards at the winch house. There was also both of his brothers, Prince Goti, Manglos the Mage, and Sir Richmond. Hands back to covering his private parts, Reyes asked, "Is my entire family involved in this?" Then, realizing that no one else in the room spoke the language, he repeated what he had just said in muffled flourish. "Everyone," Tyr replied. "Father and Mother would have liked to have been here too, but they're busy keeping the king distracted. It was Father who instructed us to free you. Can we trust these guards?" Reyes asked doubtfully. Manglos took 2 steps towards Reyes, and then tapped him gently on the head with the handle of his staff. The mage said nothing in the way of magical words, and made no mystical gestures. Then he withdrew his staff and said, "Try speaking now." Reyes said, unsure what Manglos had done. "I said, can we trust these guards?" Reyes was surprised. His mouth seemed to have no trouble forming the words now. "These two?" "Yes," Greyfulf commented. His voice sounded cold and heartless, but his words suggested he did have some feelings for his brother. "Once you were led away, I left the party and made a few arrangements. I replaced those that were due to be on duty this night with men we can trust implicitly. This is Sergeant Grim, and this is Guardsman Chick." He pointed to each of the soldiers in turn. "They were both there on the day we found you," Tyr said. "Grim even saved Jenny's life that day. You are probably too young to remember." "Are you certain that the king won't make my father pay for my escape?" Reyes asked. Having lost his language skills for a few hours, Reyes was really beginning to truly appreciate having them back. "Father was willing to take the chance," Greyfulf said. "You might not share his blood, but you are his son. If it does come to it, Father would willingly go to the gallows instead of you." "It won't come to that. My father might well arrest your father because of this." This was from Prince Goti. "But I can't see him going through with an execution." "Maybe I ought to stay, just in case," Reyes said. He was beginning to feel awkward standing naked in front of so many people, with nothing to protect his dignity except his hands. "Nothing doing," Jenny instructed. She entered the winch house. "Do you have any idea what's waiting for you tomorrow morning? The king doesn't just want to see you executed. He wants you to suffer. You'll be hung by the neck until you're almost dead, and then you'll be stuck on a rack and stretched until your muscles begin to snap. Then the executioner will cut off your limbs one at a time. If you're lucky, he'll start with the head, but the way the king has been lately, I think your head will be left until last." Prince Goti finished for her. "And believe me, the king's executioner is a master at his craft. He'll make sure you stay alive and feel every cut until the very last one." "That does it then," Reyes insisted. "I'm staying. I can't let Father suffer like that." "If the king should decide to execute your father in your stead, you can believe it'll be a lot quicker for him." This was Grim speaking. "You only get the full treatment because you're a harpy," Jenny said. "He has no concept of mercy for what he thinks of as the evil races." Reyes looked around at those gathered there. It made him feel good that his family had come out in support of him. "What do I do? What can I do?" "Though I hate to suggest it," Greyfulf began, "your best bet would be to head north into elven territory and try to make some sort of life for yourself there." "At least for a few months," Jenny added. "It might be safe to come back eventually, but people know you now. They know who you are, they know what you are. At least they will soon. It won't take long for word to get around the castle." "Elves?" Reyes was shocked. "But they're evil." "So are harpies," Jenny replied. "Couldn't I just hide in that painting Manglos has? I'll sit in there quietly until the king and his people have left." And Reyes asked, It wouldn't work, Mangloss replied. When you are found to be missing, the king is bound to demand a search of the castle in case you are still hiding here somewhere. What is worse, last night Khalid came to my hut to talk to me about a certain talisman. He didn't stay long because of the party, but I'm expecting to see him again tomorrow. He'll see the painting glow and know that someone is hiding in there. We could hide the painting, Reyes suggested. Khalid might notice it was missing and want to know why, Mangloss replied. We can't take the chance. Reyes shook his head hesitantly. Elven lands then, I guess. Be very careful there, Jenny said. They are an evil people. You might have to fight in order to survive there. I retrieved your bow from your room, Greyfulf said, handing over the bow and a quiver of 8 arrows. These arrows are of harpy design, so they shouldn't look suspicious. They're all I could get hold of at such short notice, but you don't want to carry too many anyway. Do I want to know how you got them? Reyes asked. He had to move his hands from where they were in order to take them. At first he tried to crouch in order to compensate, but that made him feel even more awkward. Probably not, Greyfulf agreed. Then he handed Reyes a black leather belt. Some harpies wear belts like this one to carry their belongings. You'll notice it has a few small pockets and straps to hold things in place. This one, for example, is designed for the harpy dart thrower. I'd give you a dart thrower too, but you've never trained with it. There's also a place you can attach the quiver to. Reyes looked at the belt for a moment and then put it on. It fitted him perfectly. Greyfulf had either been lucky in picking out the right belt, or he had been ready for this day for a long time. What about clothing? I can't go naked into the night. You'll have to, Jenny said. Harpies rarely wear clothing. A skirt, maybe? Reyes suggested hopefully. If we give you a human-designed skirt, you'll stand out. Greyfulf has a few harpy skirts that he's taken as trophies in combat, but they're in my home in Leamington, Greyfulf finished for her. You're lucky I brought the belt. I know you're embarrassed, Tears said, but try to get used to being naked. Harpies don't wear much in the way of clothing. If you walk around Golespon covering yourself, you'll soon be picked out. Reyes had to stand up to attach the quiver to the belt. Once he was done, he hesitated for a moment before his hands returned to their previous position. Then he decided to try and heed Tyr's words, and he let his hands fall to his side. It was hard for him to ignore how exposed this made him feel. Father gave me a couple of silver coins to give you, Tyr said as he handed over the 2 glittering coins. Put them in one of the belt's pockets. It's not much, but it should help. They have no markings, so you should be able to sell them in any city in exchange for the local currency. We would give you more, but you don't want to stand out, and a harpy with too much money would. Just don't go selling any horses for a mere 1,500 arcraw, Greyfulf commented. And you should be alright. Thank you, Reyes said. Thank you all. I won't forget you. Reyes, Sir Richmond said, I don't have any special gifts for you. I do, however, have a spy network working throughout Elestrade, courtesy of Mangloss here. In Golespon alone I have no less than 6 spies. One of these spies I will contact later today. I'll tell him to get in touch with you. I doubt there are many unattached male harpies in the city, so he should be able to find you easier than you'll be able to find him. His name is Clangy, Joris Clangy. This way at least you'll have at least one friend in the city, and you can keep in touch with your family through him and the scribble that he carries. He won't mind that I'm a harpy? Reyes asked. He's very open-minded, Sir Richmond replied. He has to be. It's part of the job. Reyes nodded. And of course, should I come across any tasty tidbit of information, I'll have a way to let you know. Anything that you think might help, Sir Richmond agreed. I'd give you a scribble so you could talk to us directly, Mangloss revealed, but it would create an obvious bulge in your belt, and you don't want to stand out. I understand, Reyes replied. It has to be all about subtlety, Mangloss continued. Being a male harpy, you'll stand out enough as it is. It might be best if you did get a skirt to cover yourself as soon as you're able. Beware of female harpies, Jenny warned him. Some of them might try to kill you out of hand just for being male. Then Mangloss caught Reyes' attention with, I wanted to give you a mage's staff. A staff can help greatly. It's an aid to concentration and will help you focus your magic. Unfortunately, a mage's staff in the hands of a harpy isn't exactly subtle. Generally, harpies don't use magic. You'd stand out like a sore thumb. Jenny finished for him. Mangloss then said, "Fortunately, back when you were less than 2 years old, your father predicted that one day you might be exiled from your home." At this comment, Greyforth looked a little on the guilty side. He took a couple of steps back. "He asked me to make a weapon suitable for you, so I made you this." Mangloss picked up a very ornate short sword from the desk. "I've since enchanted it in such a way so that it holds the same properties as a mage's staff. Mages tend to use staves because we come from peasant stock. Swords tend to be a little beyond our purse. However, since it was intended that you would learn how to wield one, I thought a sword would suit you far better." "This is subtle?" Reyes questioned. "From what I've read, harpies don't really use swords either." "No," Mangloss agreed. "Usually they don't, but they do sometimes collect trophies from their conquests. I'll admit, I wasn't thinking you'd end up bound for Elistrade, but hopefully the sword will pass muster as a battle trophy." "It looks heavy," Reyes said. "Were I able to fly, wouldn't this drag me down?" "It is fairly heavy, at least while you're wielding it," Mangloss agreed, handing over the sword still contained as it was in a nicely ornate scabbard. "However, I have also enchanted the scabbard. While the sword rests in its scabbard, it will weigh less than 1/10 of its weight out of the scabbard. Flying should be no problem. The scabbard will even attach nicely to the belt." "Thank you," Reyes said. "Thank you all." "We're not finished," Jenny announced. She handed Reyes 2 beautiful, ornate silver bracelets. On the night Agnart left, she did so in a hurry. She left her ring behind, the one that made her look human. She also left these behind. I was going to keep them for myself, but I think your need is greater. "I don't know what to say," Reyes stammered, taking the bracelets. "Just don't use them on humans," Greyforth warned. "I won't," Reyes promised. He placed them on his forearms. They didn't make him feel any different. Reyes wanted to take a practice shot at something to test them out, but now was hardly the time. "One day," Prince Goatee said, "I will replace my father on the throne. I love my father, so I hope that day isn't too soon, and maybe he will outlive you. However, keep an ear out for news of that day. When it comes, you will be welcomed back into the land of Florith. What is more, on the day you and I meet again, I will set a precedent unknown in the history of our country. That day I shall declare kinship with a harpy. I will officially raise a harpy to the rank of a nobleman, and, depending upon your age, I shall make that harpy a knight." "Thank you, Prince," Reyes said. "Jenny and I also saved you a bag of selected meats from the party," the prince said. "You must be starving by now." "I am," Reyes replied. He took the bag and began to tuck in eagerly. "Careful," Greyforth said. "You might want to save a little for later." "Well," Jenny said, "you'll need to get a good head start before you're missed. So if there's nothing else, we had better open the gates, and you had better flee for your life."